Book objects are very important pieces in László Lakner's art. The series of his book works started with a story going back to the late 1950s when László Lakner, as a young person, was visiting a second-hand bookstore as an antiquariat and found a book of Georg Lukács, the famous philosopher, in this second-hand bookstore. And by chance, Georg Lukács himself was there in this bookstore, and László Lakner asked him to sign this book. And after this book was hanging in his studio, tied up on the wall as an ambiguous fetish, which remembered him to this story, until the late 1960s, early 1970s, when László Lakner finally realized that this ambiguous fetish on the wall of his studio is an artwork, a metaphor that somehow represents, again, a human condition on the one hand, and the ambiguity of leftist theories, or an ambiguous position of leftist theories of realism on the one hand, and on the other hand, it also addresses the question of new media and the fate of classical media in the age of the new media. Marshall McLuhan's theories influenced Lakner a lot. Medium is the message made him a big impact in the late 1960s. And the tied-up books, for example, the tied-up Georg Lukács book is related to the questions of the Gutenberg galaxies or the Gutenberg galaxy, or questions of the fate of old media in the age of the new media. This was a starting point of a big series of works titled Aesthetics, in which he painted tied-up books in a trompe-l'oeil manner, but also created book objects tied up like a big library, Babylonian library that somehow shows the history of European culture as a sort of artifact. And if you look at this wall, we arranged here, or we show here, different types of Lakner's book objects. For example, in some cases, it doesn't tie up a book on a wall, rather makes from a book a tribal object, an axe. Again, an ambiguous phenomenon, because it looks like an ancient axe that is formed of a book and wood. It's like a weapon on the one hand, but also somehow the metaphor of the fate of human culture, a new tribal culture. On the other hand, we see here such works as a piece from the late 90s, early 2000s, Sandbook, which is a double reference. On the one hand, referring Sand aus den Urnen, a book of Paul Celan, and the motive of the sand that is related to memory, but also to the short story of Borges about the Sand Book, which is a book of sand, which is a metaphor of this infinity of references and referential layers. After he moved to Germany in the 1970s, Lakner started a new series of books, open books. He titled this series Pages Conquered for Painting. In this series, the paint conquers the pages. It makes them invisible, unreadable. He turns the pages of unknown books into paintings, and he presents on these paintings, in some cases, again, art historical references, like here, we see the signature of Michelangelo. It was a very interesting metaphor that in the 1970s, before his immigration in Hungary, he presented tied-up books, like prisoners, like the figures on his paintings. We also see in the exhibition the execution of revolutionaries. They are also tied up. The books are like subjects, are like human figures tied up. On the other hand, after the 1974 immigration of Lakner, he opened up the book. And this open book, partly visible, partly invisible book, becomes one of the key motives of his art. And this book, again, a tied-up book, is a Mao Bible, recalls Lakner's early period, early 1970s, when he was interested in new forms of leftisms. And he, in the 1980s, when he did this work, somehow looks back to his early period, early times, and early questions regarding leftism, just like as it was the subject of memory.